Having read Postman and McLuhan, you are certainly in a better position to read this book. I mean, maybe it'll be a little less interesting for you because you've read those works. You'll see how much he relies on McLuhan, and I think Postman might have been mentioned in the index, but certainly things that are reminiscent of those two thinkers. This is a McLuhan-esque statement, is it not? With a twist. I won't say that it's a completely just an echo of McLuhan, but certainly the idea that media work their magic or their mischief sounds very McLuhan-esque. But on the nervous system itself, I don't think that that's anything that would surprise McLuhan. He might have said such things in an offhand way about the nervous system that is bringing in a biological component to the argument. Maybe that's what McLuhan had in mind all along. I don't know, but Carr, that's the theme of the book, is the neurological, biological aspect of what he believes is happening to us, that forms of perception are changing in response to our use of the internet, because we're changing, and we're changing primarily in the sense of being rewired, to use the metaphor, that we are changing, our brains are changing because of the way that we seek out information, seek out different things using modern communications technologies. So that is a different aspect to it. The emphasis on the nervous system is not really something that was certainly Postman didn't think that way, and I don't really think it was a huge or very well thought aspect of McLuhan. However, this is, again, very McLuhan-esque. We come to pretend that the technology itself doesn't matter. It's how we use it that matters, we tell ourselves. The implication, comforting in its hubris, is that we're in control. That's McLuhan. I mean, and this idea that we're at a moment of transition between different modes of thinking, that's Postman. Take a look at that again. Yeah, this notion, I'm just looking for we'll get back to this determinists versus instrumentalists, the idea that some here, Emerson saying things are in the saddle and ride mankind. Very interesting thing to be said in the 19th century by Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great American poet, philosopher, thinker. As opposed to contemporary cultural critic James Carey, technology is technology. It is a means for communication and transportation over space and nothing more. Determinists who believe that in some way or another, maybe we're not fully determined by the technologies that we use, especially the communications technologies or the intellectual technologies, as Carr puts it, as opposed to, the determinists would say we are deeply affected by these things. We are changed by these things. Our nature is transformed by these things. Whereas the instrumentalists would say, they're just things that we use, just tools that we use. You shouldn't exaggerate the effect that the tool we use actually has on us, which is a great philosophical debate. Great thing to bring up. I'm having trouble getting back. Oh, good. Getting back to certainly Carr, like McLuhan, like Postman, is determinists in the sense that they all believe that we're being transformed by our technologies. In what way? Well, he quotes a Duke college professor. She said this, I think, around 10 years ago. I can't get my students to read whole books anymore. And this is supposed to be emblematic of the kind of rewiring that he's going to suggest is happening to us, where the internet is wiring us or rewiring us in such a way that the kind of sustained reading that books demand, reading a whole book demands, is becoming less and less possible for us, more and more of an effort. and less something that we actually do. And this professor, I don't know in what context she said it, is certainly voicing something that many teachers would agree with. It is hard to get students to read whole books anymore, although I'm skeptical that it was ever easy. I mean, it was never easy. And I would, point out that reading the whole book is not always the point, right? We all read in different ways. And sometimes it's hard to read a whole book. Sometimes the best part of the book is, a fairly small part. But I don't know if it was, again, I don't know the context in which she said this, and I think there is a lot of truth to it, but I don't know how often students ever read the whole book. It really depends on the kind of book it is, right? But this is the thesis, the general thesis of the book, that we are at this moment of transition between two very different modes of thinking. And I think that here again we can see his reliance on McLuhan and Postman. For instance, this is he says, the new kind of mind that wants and needs to take in and draw out information in short, disjointed, often overlapping bursts. That to me sounds very much like Postman's critique of television culture. So that before computers really sunk in as anything that could possibly affect the average person's thought, Neil Postman was saying this about the effects of television. And certainly the linear literary mind is a theme that runs through McLuhan and, of course, Postman. The transition from this, this is typographic America or the Gutenberg galaxy, whose expressions we're using. But this is the sort of, kind of prophetic idea on part of Carr that, like Postman, he's saying that the linear literary mind, so whatever he means by that, I mean, we know from Postman what Postman means by that, is in eclipse. Maybe yesterday's mind. It probably is. We don't know exactly what that means. But, and he's expressing his own anxieties. How are we being made stupid by television or the internet? Well, stupid, I don't know what's stupid. I think what he's saying is that his mind is changing. And what he can't do anymore is the deep reading that he used to do, what he calls deep reading. And he is being wired. He suspects that his brain has been rewired in such a way by his use of the internet, to think in a different way, to take in information in a different way. So that's the anxiety. And many an adult has felt that television or the internet or any other things have changed them in ways that they are not so great. This, maybe is the most important part of his thesis, because again, if there's anything really original here or new, it's the idea of being biologically rewired by our internet use. And the central idea there is neuroplasticity, which is the idea that we can be rewired, that the brain can go through profound changes as a result of the things that we do as adults. A very interesting passage where he describes the change in thinking from the idea that the brain is pretty much fixed once we hit adulthood in its basic wiring and structures, to a contemporary view that sees the brain as more plastic, that is more changeable, more mutable. That this is a very interesting evolutionary fact, I suppose. As he says, the bottom of that, the genius of our brain's construction is not that it contains a lot of hardwiring, but that it doesn't. It is that we can learn, we can adapt. That is our great advantage as Homo sapiens over other creatures, is that we have this capacity to think differently, to learn different skills, to rewire ourselves. This is a good thing, right? For a lot of different reasons. But as he says, the news is not all good. Because, of course, anybody who's studied these things, the psychology of it, of habit, of the difficulty of changing habits, we can change habits, but it's not that easy. This has been something that's been treated by certain philosophers, American pragmatism, and certainly by Aristotle 2,500 years ago in his Nicomachean Ethics, the importance of habit and the importance of establishing what he would call the right habits, ethically speaking, because of the difficulty of changing one's habits. Neuroplasticity means we can change, we can be rewired, we can rewire ourselves to a certain extent, but that we fall into certain pathways, what he calls paths of least resistance. And so we tend to stay in the grooves that we establish, which is, of course, something human beings have always known, the importance of habit, the importance of repetition, because we will naturally do what feels right to us. It takes an effort to do things differently. So the anxiety, again, that we maybe, as a result of our use of the internet and falling away from print culture, again, this is a generational thing on his part, how closely it applies to your own experience, that we've fallen into some bad habits. This idea of intellectual technologies, that if we think about the determinists versus instrumentalists, certainly he is talking about different technologies, but that he is concentrating on what he calls intellectual technologies, which is interesting because, again, it reflects his own personal experience with the internet as a content creator, as a writer, as a journalist, blogger, whatever. That's his internet. It's an intellectual technology. It's not watching Netflix. It's not Facebook. It's not social media. So it's his own particular experience. But why don't we stop there and pick it up with that idea.